Okay, I have this in my head divided into two pieces, and the first is largely about the reasons that I don't hate rubrics on Learn. The second, I think by extension, you can anticipate, will be about why I do hate rubrics on Learn. And we'll see how the timing balances out on those two things. I'm not going to teach you anything about how to implement rubrics on Learn on a mechanical level, but I will give you a bit of conceptually how I'm transferring my teaching and assessment, embodying it in the rubrics that I have. But it's certainly beyond the scope of this conversation for us to dig into Learn itself in detail. The ways that I think rubrics help overall, these are the main things I'll step through with some examples from rubrics I actually use in some of my courses. This is how I can create a really visible alignment for me, for my TAs, for my students, between what the learning goals are of the course and the assessment that we're doing. I find it really helps me achieve clarity about why I'm assessing things the way that I am, how I'm balancing the weighting of my assessments, if I have to put it into a rubric and say this is worth X and this is worth Y. It creates real discipline for me that I have to do that before the beginning of term. And it's ultimately far more efficient in terms of grading. I find this saves me a great deal of time. And I teach in a wide variety of kinds of courses, and the rubrics keep paying off for me in all of them. The students really value having clear targets in advance. I have mixed feelings about this. I want there to be room at the top for them to do the extraordinary, for them to extend their knowledge, for them to show mastery, and rubrics don't seem in general to support that, but my experience has been that with writing the rubrics appropriately to carve out that space at the top end and say, here's what mastery would look like, the students still get this other benefit of being clear on what they're aiming for all the way through and what counts and what's really important. The rubrics are a way of giving students more and more specific feedback than I can do if I'm handwriting or manually typing qualitative responses. That's huge for the students and for me because I am chatty, and that's crippling when it comes time to marking major assignments. And the rubrics become not just a tool for keeping all of my TAs relatively in sync and producing the same kind of feedback, but they're the script I use to have that conversation with the TAs, one assignment after another. So when I'm building a rubric, and here's one for a very short writing assignment, one of the key things that I do in the design of the rubric is use criteria groups in the rubric, and each criteria group is tied to a learning outcome. What property am I actually trying to assess in this? So if there's a writing course where part of what I want people to achieve is good control of the fundamentals of grammar and spelling, that's a criteria group in my rubric. So it's a piece, it's clearly set out. This is one of the things, and it aligns with one of the learning goals that we've talked about in the course right from the start in the syllabus. So I use criteria groups as those sort of bins for which properties am I assessing in this assignment. And then I set the levels for my assessments in the rubric basically at a granularity that's pretty typical of how I grade. I'm a big 5-point intervals person, for instance. So a lot of my rubrics are going to be set up to that sort of number of levels. But I vary that according to how tightly divided I need things to be. So I'm controlling that with the levels in the rubric. And then the levels of the overall score, the bit where it's summed up along the bottom, those can also have qualitative labels to them. And I try to look those over pretty hard in the design of the assessment on things to say, what does a pass look like? What does a passing mark look like? It should be about here. But what does honors level performance look like, which in most of the programs in which I teach is about a 75. So where should a 75 be here to tune the rubric overall and use that to set the level of the bins across that bottom overall score so that a student can see at a glance I scraped through by the skin of my teeth. I achieved enough to represent honors level performance. I did well. I rocked it. And that's the kind of granularity I'm looking for down there. Your mileage may vary. It's still possible with a rubric to give part marks, and that was really important to me. I held off using rubrics for a long time because I was worried I couldn't do this. So this is an example from one of my assignments where I'm trying to anticipate what they're going to do wrong, but I can't always do that. I have built in here the kinds of things. You made some good matches but didn't particularly conquer challenges. The kinds of things I expect that they'll do wrong, but no lesson plan survives contact with the enemy, right? They're going to do something unexpected that is only part mark worthy, and you can still implement that with rubrics. So one of the key places you can do that is in the score and feedback portion over on the right, where that little yellow triangle with the exclamation point is. After you've indicated a general category of excellent, you can tweak that value if there's something else that's come up in the student's assignment that doesn't perfectly align with you reading their minds in advance of the term about everything they might possibly do. Hugely important to me, and I imagine to a number of instructors. I also really like to be able to deduct late penalties, which Word is not crazy about, so I need to, which Learn is not crazy about, so I need to be able to do that manually. And award bonuses, which I also need to be able to do despite, in many ways, the rubric. So I'm going to do that over here, grading in a Dropbox. I'm going to tweak this value. I'm going to include a note in the feedback saying why I did so. Late penalty cost you 10% is something I can type in my sleep. But the rubric helps me preserve the feedback to them on how they did on the assignment overall. Here's how you actually performed on the assignment, and if it had come in on time, here's the mark you would have gotten up here. Here's the mark you actually got once we do all of the horse trading around late penalties and bonuses for participating in experiments and other things that come along. So the rubric preserves the clarity of that feedback for the students, even when I have to do some tweaking. The rubric, I often have a chunk of my rubric that I think of as the got it checklist. First of all, this is not the most exciting part of the rubric to deal with, but this is a very basic first year writing assignment. Send an email like a grown-up professional human being. For the TAs, they've got a straightforward radio button thing. Was it sent from their UWaterloo email address? Good, give them a mark for that. Did it include a salutation? Good, give them a mark for that. Did they resist including an emoji? Hallelujah, give them a mark for that. And the students can see ahead of time all the targets they've got to hit. The TAs can go bang, 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 bang through it and give very clear feedback to a student. Instead of you got a 9 out of 10, you missed something. They know exactly what they missed. It's fast and easy to do, really good communication. But I use something similar to that even on more substantial assignments. So we have one in the term with writing a formal incident report. And this is a 15 or 20 page paper, but the got it checklist gives them a few marks at the beginning for, did you have a title page? Did you have an executive summary? Tick, 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 tick. You actually need some of that stuff to get people to a pass who handed something in and they've got the mechanical bits in place. There's your cushion at the bottom, the baseline of, did I do the essentials? I usually represent in my sort of got it checklist section of my rubric. And nobody gets a good mark with just the stuff on the got it checklist, but it gives you that 20 or 30% at the bottom for everything else to sit on. I find this a really valuable tool for giving more specific feedback to students, giving them a sense you fitted into the 20-point, the 15-point, or the 10-point territory, and laying that out qualitatively. I do a lot of work in arts and with writing, and telling them a little bit more about what 15 out of 20 means. This is an example where I'm trying to set a landmark for my TAs as well as my students. You had a few minor errors, the sort of thing that most people would overlook politely. It's not going to distract anyone, is really good. You had a few minor errors that are going to make you look a bit bad, and you would want to proofread that more carefully before sending it to an executive. Not as good. But those are separate from, you had errors that would be embarrassing. And that helps my TAs make a more qualitative assessment. So it's not about counting the number of typos. If we did that, there's not an executive on this campus who would survive an assessment. It's looking at the kinds of errors and how much difference they make. And you can be more specific about that if you've got a little paragraph, but you don't have to rewrite it every time. It's critical to take a look at what the student sees of the rubric. So the test student is your new best friend. This is still not my favorite thing in the whole world to do. And Scott and I spend an embarrassing amount of time on the phone across campus, both of us with test students open, saying, well, I can see this now. But it's important to know that what I see when I look at a rubric isn't exactly what the student sees. And one of the key lessons that I have learned about that is the student sees the whole rubric with check marks at the ones that they got. So there's a lot of work you could be doing for each of these items to not only put the description of the item there, but to also add the feedback you'd like to have presented to them. That feedback gets propagated into the feedback box you see in the dropbox, and it shows up at the bottom of this. But they have all of this too. So I've stopped filling out any special feedback to come over here. I just put it all here because now I know from looking at the test student, they can see this. So they see what I see, what the TAs see, and I don't anymore when I'm building a rubric, write it out in English in quotation marks in any way. Because I've already done really wordy, long descriptions in the rubric. There are a couple of ugly things that happen because of the way I use the rubric. When I rename those criteria groups, the names of those criteria groups are one of the things that gets propagated down here into the feedback at the very bottom. And that's a little bit confusing to students. But if it's consistently confusing and it just always behaves that way, I think that's easier for them to cope with than when things vary in their ugliness. So whatever you do that's awkward and weird, if you can be consistently awkward and weird so that the way they found it the first assignment is exactly the way they're going to find it in all the subsequent assignments, they'll be fine with it. It's when you or one of your TAs suddenly decides to go grade in the grade book instead of in the Dropbox, or suddenly decides to write comments in the feedback area instead of completing a rubric, that the students will literally say, I didn't get marked because I can't see it in the ugly way that it was before. Which is a disappointing thing about human nature, but it's a consistent thing, and we can work with consistency. Consistency is the key to why I like using this with TAs. Hugely important to me to find as many ways as I can to get all of my TAs doing roughly the same thing. So my wordy blurbs in rubrics are the crutch, the prop, the framework for my TAs, but also the beginning of the conversation that we have when we meet at the grad house on Wednesday mornings to go through the rubric for the latest assignment. The rubric is just how we shape that conversation. Now, that's what I like. Here are the things that I think are pitfalls you want to watch out for. You will have bumped into some of these already. The people on this side of the room will have bumped into all of these already. But I want to highlight some of these distinctions because if you suddenly come onto Team Rubric, these are the things that will trap you. That's a list. I have slides for each one of them. Let's just do it. All right. The difference between something in the Dropbox that hasn't had anybody's fingerprints on it yet, says evaluate, something someone's in the middle of and the draft has been saved, and something where the assessment has been published is really important. And one of the main ways that you want to take advantage of that, the students can't see the draft stuff. Mostly, almost entirely. That is slightly not true for special cases, but it took Scott and I 15 minutes last night on the phone to talk about what some of those special cases are. When it's in draft, the students can't see it. When it's published, the students can. Your TAs have to be crystal clear on that distinction, and you have to decide at what point in your grading cycle you publish the marks. Because if you've got 4 TAs working through an assignment and one of them hits publish, the other 150 students in the class all know that their roommate got their marks back and they didn't. And what the other 3 TAs are going to do for the next 2 days is answer email messages about why they haven't got the grading done instead of grading. But at the same time, I've had TAs go through and do all of their grading, and it could be 2 weeks later before a student says to me, why haven't I got my grades yet? They'll email their TA instantly. They'll wait weeks before contacting me. And the TA just genuinely doesn't know they haven't released the grades in any way. So the difference between draft and publish is going to be a big, you're going to figure out instantly. You all know already, and you're good. It's your TAs for whom this is often the first time through at this level of complexity that will be a pitfall. This will be a pitfall even more. I screwed this up a bunch of times the first time I was working, and I have TAs mess it up every time. But there is a difference between save and record the results of a rubric, save the results of a rubric, and cancel. Cancel does what you hope it would do, makes all of that work go away. Save is for a partially completed rubric. Save this, I'll come back to it later, don't let the students see it. Save and record you can do with a completed rubric, and that's great. And if that box is ticked, and this is important, if that box is ticked, it transfers the feedback out of that rubric into the assignment feedback. If that box isn't ticked, or you haven't hit save and record, you've done the work, but you haven't let anybody in on the secret. And so you will feel like you've graded, your TAs will feel like you've graded, your students don't know it yet. Don't keep it a secret unless you're doing it on purpose. But if you want to do it on purpose, there are very few places to hide. It's awkwardly easy to expose the work that you're working on and preliminary marking efforts. So here, this line for annotated bibliography, this is what students see when there's been some marking activity, but there's no mark published yet. Normally, they'd be able to click on this and go look at the feedback. All they know here is there's some feedback there, and I can't have it yet. So this is like putting a bowl of candy on the table and saying, not until you finish your spinach. Not that our students think grades are candy, but that's one of the things that the students are seeing when you're partway through doing an assessment, is they know you're partway through. You can't, that isn't something you can conceal from them very easily. The other thing that I've wrestled with a lot on this is that the rubrics themselves are all visible to the students. And I don't mind sharing that, but I'd love to have a little lead time to get them right. And in this particular course, there were probably 15 or 20 rubrics. And then I have the same problem you've had with your content of there just being too much and it's impossible to navigate. So I've got first-year students wading through a ton of rubrics. My solution this term was only to import the rubrics one at a time as I needed them for an upcoming assignment. But there's a dozen or more, and as some of you may have noticed this term, we couldn't actually import course content for the first half of the term. So to the saints, I emailed every week saying, please import this one rubric. I apologize. But this is one of the things that you can't hide, and it can be overwhelming to the students. Where do I go look for this information? I actually put together a series of slide shots at the beginning of the term and posted them on Learn of how to get to the rubrics. The saddest mistake I had a TA make recently, grading in the Dropbox is different from grading in the grade book. And in the Dropbox, if you use a rubric attached to your Dropbox and grade there, then when you finish, at the bottom there's that thing I showed you with the tick mark to transfer feedback and save and record. And you would just automatically be able to put the grade in. If you attach a rubric to an item in the grade book instead of the Dropbox, when you get to the end of the rubric, there is no transfer the mark. The students will be able to see the rubric and what you filled out on it, but you can't automatically put the mark in. You will have to manually enter that mark into the slot for the grade, which was another case of a TA feeling like they had done all of their grading, and 2 weeks later students are saying, I don't understand, I can see the feedback, but I don't have a mark. They then had to go in, check every rubric, and type in the grade. Nobody was happy. You will be sad. You will be even sadder if you have to do anything involving arithmetic in the Dropbox. So here are my 3 big arithmetic opportunities. I'm fine with arithmetic, but the world is full of people saying, I'm terrible at that, and they are all your TAs the day that you come up with an assignment that involves more than one rubric. So this assignment included putting in basically a purpose statement to direct the thing and general criteria for a memo. Lovely. What Learn is going to do is pick one of those for you, use that to suggest the overall grade. So this assignment is out of 50. That's out of 15, comes to 73%. It's going to suggest a 73% of the 50 based on how they did on one part of it, one rubric. I've set this up. Your mileage may vary. I set this one up so that what the TAs need to do is add the score out of 15 to the score out of 35 to get a score out of 50, instead of letting Learn decide what 73% of 50 is. But there's no tool to help your TAs do that. It's actual arithmetic. The one in the middle is the other actual arithmetic I do for late penalties. So up at the top, you see what the score is the rubric provided. 53 out of 59 is 89%. And I have to do the arithmetic of subtracting 5.9 from 53 to get to 47.1 to deduct the 10% late penalty. Or you could come up with an easier late penalty that's different for every single assignment, but you're not going to do that and you know it. So I'm just doing quick arithmetic for every late penalty. There's no push button way to do a late penalty and Learn, and every time they have me beta test something, I ask for one. The third one is it's possible to give bonuses. I'm a big fan of bonuses for recognizing that extraordinary thing they did well, not just the extraordinary and unexpected thing they did poorly. So when you're setting up the design of the grade item, can exceed, if it's possible for somebody to get 103%, you're going to need to set that. If you think that's likely, that's the one thing that gets in the way of doing the happy arithmetic of adding bonuses. That's separate from a grade item that is itself a bonus, which has the bright yellow star on it. This is just how to be able to award bonuses in excess of the value of an assignment, is right in the description of it. I added this slide this morning because right now the biggest thing I hate about rubrics is how hard it was to put together this deck for you. It's pretty much impossible to print out a rubric. So it's pretty much impossible for me to have that Wednesday morning conversation with my TAs without having my laptop open in front of me and scrolling and showing it to them, or them going along in parallel. It's very hard to see the whole length of a rubric, and Scott and I have been trying for 2 days to find any decent screen capture tool that will take the whole window, not just what shows on the screen. There are a lot of reasons why having a practical paper copy would be useful, and it doesn't seem to be possible. But mostly, this is the worst thing about the rubrics of all. When you click on the rubric, it opens the rubric up and thus hides your entire view of the preview window of the assignment. So you can either see your rubric or you can see the work the students did that you're trying to assess using your rubric. And I and my TAs and everybody I know gets around this by using multiple screens. This is my actual grading setup, is that I've got Learn open in 2 different places and I'm stepping through manually on both of them so that I can see the students' work while I'm scrolling through the rubric. I wish I had better news for you on that. But even if I could print out a paper copy and just plan ahead, it would be better than this, which is the worst of it. And given all of that, I still use them, still a big fan. Would recommend. That's it.
Thank you, Linda. It's interesting, all the challenges that you had, and the solutions that you found are even more interesting. So thank you very much for pointing to the solutions, to the challenges, along with the challenges. So that's really good. Questions for Linda about her presentation using rubrics? I have a question. In the blurb of your presentation, it mentioned that this is a large course, large class course. So how are you handling all this type of navigation and giving feedback and stuff?
My courses vary widely. I teach studio courses with as few as 25 students. Writing course I'm teaching this term is 175 students, which feels pretty mammoth to me until I started working on a PD course this term, which is 900 students. At the very biggest ones, you're scaling the number of TAs and you're scaling the way those grading meetings work, and it becomes essential to have rubrics and to have bulletproof rubrics for doing that. That's one of the reasons that I use them most faithfully. At the 900 student level, we actually bump into a few things that Learn isn't configured to do 900 people at once. So there are some bad news scenarios right out there at the boundaries.
So we will hear from you about the 900 students.
Yes.
And how do they go?
Yes.
So questions for either Linda or Scott? We have 5 minutes left.
This is for Linda. You just talked about how setting up your rubrics is extremely important. I do a lot of marking of work term reports, and I'm thinking about creating some rubrics. How do you come up with exactly what to put in each category? And how much time does that take?
The course build for a PD course is 8 months or more, and rubric development is certainly part of that. I don't know if I have a good answer for you because I know something you don't know, which is that the PD course that I'm developing is about to change how work term reports happen for at least 3 of the 6 faculties starting last month. And part of it is to make the work term reports far more straightforward to assess. So I'm really working on those rubrics right now with the instructions to make them possible not just for undergrad co-op student TPAs, but also for professors who do a lot of work with them. At the same time that we're being asked to make them a piece of reflective writing rather than a technical report. So that actually sounds impossible. We've had tremendous success this term in the first offering of the course, and part of it is choosing a specific reflective writing model. In this case, something called DEAL, which there's a tutorial in the new writeonline.ca site that Laurier, Guelph, and Waterloo have developed on reflective writing, to which we can refer students. And we use the DEAL model. We could have chosen any of several, but we chose the DEAL model as the framework of what we want them to learn how to do. And so those are the sections that the rubric includes. There's a section on basic professionalism in writing as one of the criterion groups, but it's primarily about how well they use the 3 main parts of the DEAL model in response to this particular report, and trying to give there the same kind of guidance to the markers that I was talking about here. It's not a typo hunt. It's, would this level of mistakes be embarrassing? Would this level of mistakes undermine your credibility? How professional and convincing would you be? Does that?
That helps a lot.
Oh, good.
Maybe I'll touch base with you.
Be happy to. Yeah.
Thank you. Questions? Mary, do you have anything online? No.
Very good.
Yeah. Questions for Scott or Linda? Okay. Scott, I have a question for you about the YouTube thing that you showed. So you said that some of the feedback that the students gave you about how hard the terminology is for them and stuff helped you. Do you get back to class to talk to them about this, or you just change it, or like, is it the same cohort of students that you worked with, or?
If it happens during term, it'll be the same. If it happens during term, it'll be the same cohort where I try to correct. Quite often with the YouTube videos, though, this is through the year. So comments that I would get in April, obviously I can't help folks who graduated or finished the course in December, but I'll use that to update the way I speak about things in the next iteration. So I say like I've been doing this for years. I mean, the YouTube channel has only been up for 2 years, so I've only really gone through 2 cycles of these comments and looking at the analytics there. I haven't really dug in too deep, but I know that the data is there if I can get to it at some point. So portions of it I've absorbed, but there's still a lot more there that can be accessed, I think.
Could you say a few words about the grad house teaching how to use the rubric on a weekly basis with a large group? Do you walk through an example report, or how do you get people to learn how to use it?
I've done this 2 different ways, one with the course where I'm running it and one with the PD course. The PD course is probably a better model because in the PD course, the assignments have all come in and one of the TPAs there has had a chance to go through and pick out a couple of representative pieces of student work. We go through the rubric together collectively and then we all mark one of those, talk through what we came up with on that assignment, see whether that changes our understanding, try to converge on a value for that assignment, then do another one, maybe do 2 or 3 in that session. That would be ideal. When I'm doing this with my TAs in ENVS 131, the assignment came in at 6:30 p.m. last night, it's 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning. I have not gone through and found representative examples. So I start that session by getting any questions from the TAs about things they saw on last week's assignment. So were there any glitches or weirdness that we need to resolve, or questions you've heard from students, so that we can sort things out retrospectively. Then we go through the rubric and what my expectation is of the kinds of challenges I'll see from students. And the grad house opens about 9:30 in the morning weekdays, and they will mop the floor around your feet, but there's plenty of space, big tables, lots of light, and they will serve you a drink after 11, depending on how your meeting went. Yeah.
Okay, we finished just on time. Thank you, Lyndon. Thank you, Scott. And if you would like to chit-chat with our presenters, please, I believe they are still around for a few minutes. And see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.